Very, thank you. We have one question left hanging over from before the break, and please do feel free to keep putting questions in the chat. Marianne and I will keep an eye on that as in this last final session. Don't forget, the chat will be sent out to you, so you'll get all the links from today. You'll have all the resources posted in the Centre for Excellence, so everything is accessible to you afterwards. Also, Marianne, have we invited people to share emails in case they want to make contact with each other?
That's the last bit of tonight. So we will, from 9:30, we'll end the formal event, but we'll keep the room open for networking, and I'll post a Google spreadsheet where we can share details if you're happy with them to be shared with the group attending this evening.
Sorry to put the cart before the horse. Let's kick off anyway this next Q&A session with Emma's fantastic question, which was, what practical strategies did any of the presenters tonight use to engage their co-creators in the first instance? So would anybody like to kick off that one for us?
Just phone calls.
Thank you.
I mean, I think before practical strategies, to me, the question is always, what's the issue? What's the problem that we're trying to solve for? Or not solve for, it's not necessarily a solution, but where are we trying to get with structural change? And who has some stake in that? Who is impacted by that, has power over it? And then to me, in the projects that I'm thinking about, if those people aren't on board, then it's not worth happening. And so kind of with legislative theater, I'm actually coming now in a different way from within councils. So councils are commissioning this, and that has its own challenges. But that means that they have some commitment and buy-in at the end. So I think that question, that first practical step, is who wants something to change?
Thank you, Katie. We have Matthew has something to say there, where I can't see you, but I see your hand is raised.
No, that's fine. I was trying to get the looking at the question. I mean, I think for me, it was finding a vehicle that engages the young people, you know, and this panto was quite good for that, and so that really engaged both the participants but also the audience as well. And then you can kind of underlie the messages underneath it, but it was finding a vehicle, a genre of theater that works.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to take that?
Yeah, I don't mind taking that. I think for me, from what I remember, it was about sort of putting out there that, you know, we want to do this project about, you know, commemorating and celebrating the 81, but we really were interested in getting different voices. So we started off with the usual kind of suspects, which were people who have lived experience or were somehow part of the repercussions of that. But we wanted to make sure that it was very, very inclusive. So we started to talk to a whole range of people, from people in public services to residents who opposed and thought that, you know, their businesses or their parents' businesses were ruined. It was those voices that we equally wanted to get. And so for us, it was around about, well, what is it that, if you could be part of this making of this thing, what is it for you, positive or negatively, that you would like to see? And it was about,
just on a really practical note there, Tony, how did you actually get that to the people that you wanted? Was it through newspapers, local radio? How did you
just by having conversations with people, inviting people to come to the events that we put on in libraries and community halls. People were coming along because they'd seen and heard about, you know, what is this for you? What would you like to contribute? So it was just really having conversations with people and taking those conversations and putting those conversations with other people who came to other events and said, look, this is what these people have said. What do you think about this? And so that's why it became very, very chaotic to manage all of those different conversations. And out of that, we pulled out some really strong themes, which we have today.
Thanks, Tony. That was great. Rob, you have something to add to this?
Yeah, just to say, I mean, it was fortunate for me in working with Imaginarium that they're very much a presence in that community. So it wasn't a case of kind of putting out ads, as it were. I mean, they run a cafe in the middle of Prescott. They are based in Cockpit House, which is right next door to where they're building the Shakespeare North Playhouse. They have promenade productions. They run children's clubs. They have a table tennis table right outside the cafe, and the kids run in and out of the cafe and borrow the bats. You know, so that makes it easier to kind of go, just come and play. You know, come and play for a bit. You're playing table tennis, but come and play with this. Come and have some games. Do this. So that kind of involvement with the community is great. The fact that we haven't put a cap on numbers, we just say we'll take 200 people if they want to be involved, of all walks of life, and of all talents, musicians, set painters, anything that, to be involved. So we want to get as many people involved as possible. Having said all that, I think there are still significant challenges of reaching out to people who don't see this kind of activity as being for them. And I think there are specific challenges in any community regarding the diversity of the people that you're working with. So for Knowsley, the community is 98% working class white. But that shouldn't be. I mean, it's diverse in one way and not diverse in other ways. So there are still challenges there, and I think the onus is on us not just to say there's an open door, but to actually go out and actively seek some people and bring some people along with us, even if they just come and want to talk. And add something to what we're doing.
So meeting people where they're at, and yeah, thank you. Anybody else got any more questions for us, or does anybody else have any responses? Any of the panelists have any more responses to that question? Yes, Laura, thanks.
I was just going to say, I've worked in organizations and I've worked as myself, and this particular project, Becoming British, is as myself as a freelancer, on top of which I moved to a new city in Sheffield relatively recently compared to the years that I spent somewhere else. And I did want to say that it's very different working as part of institutions and having that support versus being on your own with your laptop, knocking on doors and saying, hey, I've got this idea, what do you think? And one of the practical steps that I'm doing is using every single opportunity to raise that, to say, hey, I'm working on this thing about becoming British, what do you think? And just bore people to death about it, because from those conversations, the people are, if they respond to the topic or the project, they will link you up, they will make introductions, and people tend to be quite generous with their networks. And I just wondered if other practitioners and artists and people here on the call have found other strategies as freelancers to go out there without the institutional support, and often also without seed funding in the first instance.
Does anybody want to comment on that? Anybody at all in the room that would like to respond or add to that thought?
For me, I think it was just about finding the person that can really access the communities if it's not part of your own community. Yeah, it's always looking for that person that can be a good facilitator. That's what I found.
Unless anybody else has anything pressing to add, I'll keep us moving if I can. Pedro had two great questions there in the chat. The first one is quite a straightforward one, so we're going to launch into that first, and it's directly to Tony. And Tony, is your magnificent drawing of your diagrams of engagement, is that something that is yours, or is that something that you're happy to share of a way of visualizing? Pedro would like to know.
It belongs to 81 Acts, and when I say that, in the sense that what we have is iterations of the people that were involved in 81 Acts. At the initial stage, when we did those consultations, we had all these workshops when people were dreamers and they dreamt about the project of what it could be. And those dreamers stayed with us for a certain amount of time, and they became out of the dreaming stage into what we have today, builders. And the builders are people who've got more capacity, more time to invest in 81 Acts. Not that other people are not don't have the same amount of time and they don't have the same amount of input. They equally do, but the builders who formulate and make most of the work happen, they created all of the resources that we have with 81 Acts. So they've created the design that you saw with the slides to demonstrate how we think this project may work as an experiment. And so it belongs to 81 Acts. It's no one person, but just as an 81 Acts. 81 Acts is not registered, it's not copyrighted, it's just a thing that we've all come up with. You know, I'm just one person out of many people involved in this process.
Thanks, Tony. And so I think maybe, you know, it can inspire us all to think in different ways and work in our collaborative, co-creative projects to find our own ways of articulating how that worked. But certainly it was such a strong and striking visual image. It was really powerful. Thank you, Tony. The other question then that Pedro had is a really fundamental one that we grapple with all the time, I think. And that's, as he says, the big ethical question is not just engaging, but also how do you leave the community that you have been working with and you have been building that sustained relationship with. So I wonder if any of the panel would like to comment on that at all.
You say how to leave or lead?
How to leave it. So if you have been delivering a long-term project in a community as an artist or an arts organization or a university, how do you then end that work is, I think, what Pedro is talking about, I guess, legacy strategies, or are you in for the long haul? How does that work?
Well, I can only talk for myself. I'm a freelance artist, and so I've been doing work in Brixton and other places around the world as well. But specifically in Brixton, I've been making work for the last 2 decades. And so the way I see it, this is just part and parcel of the work that I will be continuing to do in that area. What's pretty much I find quite inspiring is that the new cultural organizations that have come in, like Brixton House, Oval House, new name, they've come into the area. They've got a £15 million building. And, you know, the way I look at it from a community point of view, it's going to be pretty much hard for them to really get, you know, everybody in that building that they would love to. And so rather than hire outreach workers, they've done a really good initial job, which is to kind of really look at the artists who are already embedded in Brixton, who are already doing work in Brixton, and using them as so-called outreachers to bring in the community into this brand spanking building. So for me, it's really about just continuing what I already do in that area anyway, regardless of whether it's a long-term project or a short project. It's something that is passionate to me because I was born and kind of raised there anyway.
Thanks, Tony. Other responses, maybe for people who aren't in that similar position of working in their own or within the long term with the community, what strategies have you got or used? Katie, are you looking like you want to speak?
Yeah, I was going to say another way that I think about it is that it's not so much a project with a beginning and end, but a practice of a tool, and that there should be a built-in process in that time frame of sharing and amplifying that tool in that space as people want to. So facilitation training being built into every project, paid for and supported, and extra time and kind of sharing throughout that project, and ideally iterations of that project to support the same kind of thing being done around other policy problems by those local facilitators. That's how TONYC is entirely run. And I think that there's this idea in that work, right? Boal says everyone is an actor, right? And then here we're saying everybody is a policymaker, but it also needs to be everybody is the leader or the facilitator or the person who speaks to the audience. And so that's a really tricky one, I think, like decentering oneself as the patriarchy of the Joker, Sanjoy Ganguly says in India, and with all love, he should know because he does it too, but we all do it, right? Like, because they're so that taking up space. So I think that that's one way of thinking about it, is a tool.
Thanks, Katie. And I think maybe that's a topic for a whole other conversation as well, is the decentering of the facilitator. Marianne, I think that might be one to put down on the possibilities for the future. Matthew was going to come in with a response to Pedro's question.
I think just kind of reiterating what Katie was saying as well, part of my work internationally is training the trainer. So the idea of just making sure that I don't have to come back, in a sense. So you're working to train the facilitator. Robert Chamber talks about handing over the stick. You know, the idea that I'm handing over the stick to somebody else so they can work locally, so I don't have to.
Thank you. Any other thoughts or responses from the panel on that idea of kind of long-term engagement and how we navigate our way beyond that? Or indeed any other questions? Oh yes, Laura, thank you.
I was going to say I stole this from a very clever person who says always the most important day is the day after, and if you start with the end in mind, you are on to a good start, and that's I add this last bit in, and I think there's often a false dichotomy that the artist is this weird non-community person that comes in and leaves, but I think if you're doing your work well and your the project is evolving, if you're not part of the community already, you'd become part of the community by the process of sharing and working equitably, and that's how I work. And so in a way, as Katie was saying, the reason really, and then because this evolves beyond, let's say, there's a public sharing or there's a feedback of some description, there's actually really tangible long-term transformations on an individual level. And me as the person taking part of it or instigating something, I also am transformed and therefore become part of that community if I wasn't already. And then it's about what are people coming on board, what are people wanting to gain from the experience, and if everyone is clear about that give and gain, then there's really great possibilities of carrying on with what we call legacy in the jargon, so that it, people continue doing art if that's what they want, but continue to tell their stories or be activists in their own way at the end of the day.
Thanks, Laura. That's great. I love the idea of give and gain. I've not heard that phrase before. It's lovely. Anybody else have anything they'd like to say in response to that, or questions or any other comments? We've got a couple more minutes, but not very long. Well, I think we can only assume then that everybody's questions are satisfied and that the panelists have presented so beautifully that everything is already answered. If you do have anything else, pop it in the chat. And other than that, I'm going to hand back to Marianne.
Perfect, thank you. Thank you everyone for a really wonderful, inspiring evening again. I'm just going to pop in the chat that spreadsheet that I mentioned. So if you are happy to share your details with everyone that attended this evening or presenters, please put what you are comfortable with into that spreadsheet and we will make sure everyone has a copy of it. And finally, the thing that we always like to do, the Centre for Excellence is always a responsive programme to what we care about and what themes and issues are relevant for practitioners in the moment. So I'm just going to put a link to our evaluation, a SurveyMonkey here. If you could spare a couple of minutes to fill that in, we'd be really grateful. We have, I can do a final one, which is, if I can find it, our or Jack, if you're there, you might be able to find it for me. Our Eventbrite link. So we have many more really interesting events coming up with the Centre for Excellence. Off the top of my head, this season alone, we have, although that one's sold out, we have a training in trauma-informed practice, which is sold out. But if you are interested, please do put your names on our wait list, as we may programme another of that training. We also have co-creating political theatre with Sarah and our colleague Abby, and we have an open space event exploring climate justice and creativity, and more to come in the new year too. So check those out on our Eventbrite. And lastly, thank you to everyone who took part today and who asked questions and who sat and listened and took it all in. So thank you. And we'll keep the space open for the next half an hour for any chit chat, or if you want to ask any more questions or share your details. So thank you very much.